In the deep pine forests of Georgia, there was a military training camp that looked like any other. Rows of tents stood neatly in place, surrounded by tall trees swaying gently in the breeze. The air buzzed with energy as men and women from all walks of life came together to prove themselves. Among them was a woman who stood out not because she wanted to, but because her presence naturally drew attention. She was one of only 2 black women in her group, and her name wasn't mentioned much at first. What people noticed instead were the whispers, the sideways glances, and sometimes even outright laughter. This woman had spent her entire life hearing things like, "You'll never make it," or "People like you don't belong here." But those words didn't crush her spirit, they fueled her fire. Growing up, she learned early on that doubters could either break you or build you stronger. And she chose to let every harsh word push her forward. That's why she was standing in this camp now, wearing the same uniform as everyone else, ready to show the world what she was made of, but proving herself wasn't going to be easy. From the very first day, the challenges piled up. During basic drills, she stumbled more than once, earning snickers from some of the recruits. On the obstacle course, she struggled to keep pace with others who seemed born for this kind of thing. Even during simple tasks like assembling gear or following tactical commands, mistakes crept in, and each one felt magnified under the watchful eyes of her peers. The hardest part wasn't the physical exhaustion or the mental strain, it was the laughter. It echoed through the camp whenever she tripped over a hurdle or hesitated before making a decision. Some of the comments were subtle jabs, muttered just loud enough for her to hear. Others were bold insults tossed around like jokes. One recruit even said, "Maybe they lowered the standards this year." Despite the constant negativity, she refused to give in. Every time someone laughed, she clenched her fist tighter. Every time someone doubted her, she reminded herself why she was there. This wasn't about proving anything to them, it was about proving something to herself. Still, the weight of their judgment pressed down on her shoulders, making every step feel heavier than it should have been. One afternoon, after yet another failed grenade simulation exercise, she sat alone near the edge of the training grounds. Her hands trembled slightly as she replayed the moment in her head, the muffled explosion, the smoke rising too close to her position, and then the inevitable chorus of chuckles from nearby recruits. She tried to tell herself it didn't matter, but the truth was, it did. She hated feeling like an outsider, like someone who didn't belong no matter how hard she worked. That's when a shadow fell across her. Looking up, she saw Colonel Harris, a senior officer known for his sharp tongue and even sharper eye for talent. He wasn't the kind of man who handed out compliments easily, so when he spoke, she braced herself for criticism. "You know," he began, his voice low but firm, "you're not here to survive. You're here to change the game. Don't forget that." His words caught her off guard. For a moment, she just stared at him, unsure how to respond. There was no mockery in his tone, no hint of sarcasm, just a straightforward observation that somehow cut through the noise in her mind. She nodded slowly, absorbing what he'd said. Changing the game, that sounded impossible, but also strangely empowering. Maybe she couldn't control what others thought of her, but she could control how she played the game out as the days passed. She started focusing less on the laughter and more on the lessons each failure taught her. When she messed up during drills, she stayed late to practice until she got it right. When someone mocked her for falling behind, she used their words as motivation to run faster, climb higher, and push harder. Slowly but surely, she began to see small victories. A perfect score on a written test. A clean landing after scaling. A wall. A moment where no one laughed, not because they stopped hating her, but because she gave them nothing to laugh at. Colonel Harris kept an eye on her progress, though he rarely said anything directly. Occasionally, he'd nod approvingly. when she executed a maneuver correctly, or offer a brief word of advice when she faltered. His presence became a quiet source of encouragement, a reminder that someone believed in her potential even when others didn't. By the end of the first month, she still hadn't won over many of her fellow recruits. They still whispered behind her back, still rolled their eyes when she stumbled. But something inside her had shifted. She wasn't fighting just to survive anymore, she was fighting to thrive. And while the road ahead was far from smooth, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to stop until she proved them wrong. Not just the people laughing at her, but the ones telling her she couldn't do it long before she ever set foot in this camp. Every night, as she lay in her bunk staring at the canvas ceiling, she repeated the same mantra to herself. I'm not here to fit in. I'm here to stand out. And with each passing day, she moved closer to doing exactly that. Weeks turned into months, and the rhythm of life in the camp became predictable yet grueling. Early mornings started with the shrill sound of a whistle, followed by hours of intense physical training. Afternoons were spent learning combat tactics, map reading, and survival skills. Nights were reserved for briefings, debriefings, or simply collapsing onto cots, too tired to think about anything but sleep. For her, every single day was a battle, not just against the physical demands of the program, but also against the lingering doubts that still crept into her mind. She had come a long way since those first awkward days on the obstacle course. Her muscles were stronger now, her reflexes sharper. She could assemble and disassemble a weapon blindfolded if she had to. But progress didn't mean perfection, and there were still moments when she stumbled. What had changed, though, was how she handled those moments. Instead of letting them crush her, she used them as fuel. Every mistake became a lesson. Every failure became a chance to improve. And slowly, she began to notice something. The laughter was fading, not completely. Of course. There were still whispers, still snickers when she lagged behind during runs or hesitated before making a decision. But they weren't as loud as they used to be. Some of it was because she was getting better. She no longer tripped over hurdles or missed targets during shooting drills. But some of it was also because she stopped giving people a reason to laugh. Confidence doesn't silence critics overnight, but it makes their words feel smaller, less significant. And that's exactly what she was building. Confidence. One particular day stands out in her memory. It was the kind of morning that felt colder than usual, the kind where even the air seemed determined to make things harder. The recruits were told to gear up for a 20-mile march through dense forest. Heavy packs weighed down their backs, and the uneven terrain made every step a challenge. By the halfway point, most of the group was struggling. Legs burned, feet blistered, and tempers flared. She wasn't immune to the pain either. Her knees ached with each stride, and her lungs felt like they were on fire. But she kept moving, one foot in front of the other, refusing to give up. As the group trudged along, she found herself near the back of the pack. That's when Sergeant Carter appeared beside her. He was known for his sharp tongue and even sharper temper. A lot of recruits avoided him whenever possible, but he always seemed to seek her out. Maybe it was because she was an easy target, or maybe it was because he wanted to see how far he could push her before she broke. You know, he said loudly enough for nearby soldiers to hear, "They say people like you don't last long out here. Maybe you should call it quits now and save yourself the embarrassment." His words hit hard, like a punch to the gut. For a split second, she considered stopping, sitting down right there on the trail and letting the weight of everything crash over her. But then something inside her snapped, not in anger, but in defiance. She straightened her posture, tightened her grip on her rifle, and kept walking. If anything, she moved faster, pushing herself harder than before. His comment wasn't going to break her. In fact, it lit a fire under her feet, The rest of the march was brutal. Every step felt like dragging lead weights through mud. Her vision blurred from exhaustion, and her body screamed at her to stop. But she didn't. When she finally crossed the finish line hours later, she collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. Medics rushed over to check her blisters and offer water, but she barely noticed. All she could think about was the fact that she'd done it. She hadn't quit. She hadn't given anyone the satisfaction of seeing her fail. Colonel Harris was waiting nearby when she finally caught her breath. He knelt beside her, his expression unreadable as usual. "You've got grit," he said simply. "That's rare. Keep showing them why you're here." His words might not have been much, but they meant everything to her in that moment. Grit. It was a small word, but it carried so much weight. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was proving herself. And while she couldn't control what others thought of her, she could control how she responded to their doubt. With every step she took, with every challenge she faced head-on, she was rewriting the story they tried to write for her. Things didn't change overnight, though. Even after that march, there were still moments when she doubted herself. Late at night, lying awake in her bunk, she'd replay conversations in her head, wondering if she'd said the right thing or made the right choice. During team exercises, she sometimes hesitated, unsure if her ideas would be taken seriously. But what did change was her resilience. She learned to trust her instincts, to speak up even when her voice shook. She learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of it. Her turning point came during a high-stakes field exercise designed to simulate real-world combat scenarios. Recruits were divided into teams and tasked with infiltrating an enemy stronghold without being detected. Her team wasn't exactly thrilled to have her leading them. Some members openly questioned her abilities, while others simply ignored her suggestions altogether. It was frustrating, but she refused to let it derail her focus. Using her knowledge of terrain analysis and stealth tactics, she devised a plan that emphasized speed, precision, and minimal exposure. When some members of her team hesitated, she barked orders with authority, refusing to let fear or dissent get in the way. As they neared the objective, disaster struck. A tripwire triggered an alarm, alerting the opposing force to their position. Chaos erupted as gunfire echoed through the woods. In the heat of the moment, she spotted an alternative route, a narrow ravine that could lead them directly to the target undetected without hesitation. She ordered her team to follow her. The move paid off. Not only did they successfully complete the mission, but they also captured key intelligence that secured their victory. For the first time, her teammates looked at her not as an outsider, but as a leader. Even Sergeant Carter, who had mocked her countless times before, begrudgingly admitted, "Maybe you're not as useless as I thought." When Colonel Harris reviewed the debriefing later, he nodded approvingly. "That's a black viper mark," he muttered under his breath, referencing an elite designation reserved for soldiers who displayed extraordinary skill and resilience under pressure. Though no one else heard him, the phrase lingered in the air like a promise. By the end of that exercise, something shifted, not just in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. She realized that she wasn't fighting just to prove others wrong. She was fighting to prove herself right. All those years of doubters telling her she couldn't do it, all those moments of wanting to give up, they had led her to this point. And now, standing tall among her peers, she knew she wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. Every challenge she faced, every doubt she silenced, brought her closer to becoming the person she'd always dreamed of being. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, she walked it with her head held high, ready to face whatever came next. The turning point in her journey wasn't just about proving herself. It was about realizing she had already started to change the game. Word of her success during that high-stakes field exercise spread quickly through the camp like wildfire on a dry day. People who once laughed or whispered behind her back now watched her with cautious curiosity. Some were impressed. Others were skeptical. But one thing was clear. She was no longer invisible. Her newfound reputation came with its own set of challenges. The same people who doubted her before now expected perfection. Every move she made was scrutinized, every decision second-guessed. It was as if they were waiting for her to slip up, to confirm their earlier beliefs that she didn't belong. But instead of letting the pressure crush her, she used it to sharpen her focus. She knew mistakes would happen, they always did, but she also knew how to recover from them. That's what grit was all about, not avoiding failure, but learning. How to rise after falling. One day, during a tactical training session, her team was tasked with navigating a simulated urban environment. The goal was simple: infiltrate a building, neutralize threats, and extract intelligence without getting caught. Simple in theory, but far more complicated in practice. Her team consisted mostly of recruits who still questioned her abilities, including Sergeant Carter, whose sharp tongue hadn't softened much despite his begrudging respect for her. After the last mission, as they prepared for the exercise, tensions ran high. Some members argued over roles, while others openly dismissed her suggestions. "We don't have time for this," one recruit snapped when she tried to explain the importance of stealth. Another chimed in, "Why don't we just go in guns blazing? That's easier." She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. Losing her temper wouldn't help anyone. Instead, she laid out her plan clearly, emphasizing the need for precision and teamwork. When some members resisted, she stood firm, refusing to back down. "If you want to charge in blindly, fine," she said, her voice steady but firm. "But I'm leading this mission, and we're doing it my way. If you don't like it, take it up with Colonel Harris." Her words silenced the room. For the first time, her teammates listened, not because they trusted her, but because they saw the determination in her eyes. They might not have believed in her yet, but they couldn't deny her resolve. And so, reluctantly, they followed her lead. The mission itself was chaotic. As soon as they entered the building, alarms blared and red lights flashed, signaling their presence. Enemy forces closed in from all sides, forcing the team to split up to avoid capture. Communication became sporadic, and panic threatened to take hold. But she stayed calm, directing her team through hand signals and quick radio bursts. When one recruit froze under pressure, unsure of what to do next, she grabbed him by the arm and pulled him into cover, whispering, "Breathe, you've got this." Her composure steadied the group, and together they managed to complete the objective. By the time they extracted the intelligence and regrouped outside, adrenaline coursed through their veins. Cheers erupted as they realized they'd succeeded against all odds. Even Sergeant Carter gave her a reluctant nod, muttering, "Not bad." Afterward, Colonel Harris reviewed the debriefing, his expression unreadable as usual. He asked pointed questions, probing for weaknesses in her strategy. She answered confidently, explaining her decisions and acknowledging areas where improvements could be made. When he finally spoke, his tone carried a hint of approval. "You're starting to understand what leadership really means," he said. "It's not about being perfect. It's about making tough calls and owning the consequences." His words stuck with her long after the meeting ended. Leadership wasn't something she'd ever thought much about before. Growing up, she'd been told to keep her head down, work hard, and hope someone noticed. But here, in this camp, she was learning that true strength came not from standing alone, but from lifting others up. She began mentoring younger recruits, especially women and minorities who reminded her of herself. During downtime, she'd sit with them, sharing stories of her own struggles and offering advice whenever they needed it. "Don't let anyone tell you're less capable because of where you come from," she told one young cadet who confided. in her about feeling out of place. Your strength lies in your ability to rise above it. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Colonel Harris promoted her to squad leader, citing her exceptional leadership qualities and unwavering dedication. Predictably, some higher-ups questioned the decision, raising concerns about whether she was ready for such responsibility. But Harris stood firm. "Lieutenant Rivers has earned her place," he declared. "Anyone who thinks otherwise can take it up with me." The promotion brought new challenges, but also new opportunities. Leading a squad meant not only managing missions, but also managing people, each with their own strengths, weaknesses, and egos. Some recruits tested her authority, pushing boundaries to see how far they could go. Others looked to her for guidance, trusting her judgment even when they didn't fully understand her methods. Through it all, she remained patient, knowing that earning their trust would take time. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the camp, she gathered her squad for a casual chat. Sitting around a small fire, they talked about everything from childhood dreams to fears about what lay ahead. For the first time, she saw them not as soldiers, but as individuals, people with hopes, doubts, and insecurities just like her. In that moment, she realized that leadership wasn't about commanding respect. It was about earning it by showing vulnerability, empathy, and authenticity. By the end of her training, she had become a legend in her own right, a symbol of perseverance and excellence. Her teammates no longer doubted her abilities. Instead, they relied on her judgment and admired her resilience. Even those who had once mocked her now sought her advice, recognizing the value she brought to the table. And though she still encountered prejudice occasionally, she faced it with the same quiet confidence that had carried her this far. Looking back, she realized that the hardest battles weren't fought on obstacle courses or in simulated combat zones. They were fought within herself. Every doubt she silenced, every fear she conquered, brought her closer to becoming the person she'd always dreamed of being. And while the road ahead was uncertain, she walked it with her head held high, ready to face whatever came next, because she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. And nothing, not laughter, not doubt, not fear, was going to stop her. Years passed, and the woman who once walked into that military training camp as an outsider returned, not as a recruit, but as an instructor. The same forest surrounded her, the same pine trees swayed in the breeze, but everything else had changed. She wasn't just another soldier anymore. She was someone people looked up to. Someone whose story inspired others to believe they could rise above their circumstances too. Standing before a new class of recruits, she took a moment to let it all sink in. Rows of young faces stared back at her, some eager, some nervous, and others skeptical. They didn't know her yet, but she knew exactly what many of them were thinking. She'd been in their shoes once, unsure of herself, unsure of whether she belonged. Now she was here to remind them that belonging wasn't something handed to you. It was something you earned, one step at a time. When I first came here, she began, her voice steady but warm, people laughed at me. They doubted me. Some thought I wouldn't last a week. Others whispered behind my back, saying things like, "She doesn't belong here." She paused, letting her words hang in the air for a moment. A few recruits shifted uncomfortably, maybe recognizing bits of themselves in her story. "But here's the thing," she continued. "Adversity doesn't define you, it reveals you. Who you are in the face of challenges is who you truly are." Her gaze swept over the room, meeting eyes with each recruit. Some looked away quickly, while others held her stare, trying to gauge whether she really meant what she said. She smiled faintly, remembering how Colonel Harris had told her the same thing years ago. Back then, his words had felt like a challenge. Now they felt like a truth she lived by every single day. After dismissing the class, She wandered through the camp, taking in the familiar sights and sounds. Everything looked the same, but it felt different now. This place wasn't just where she'd proven herself, it was where she discovered who she truly was. And as much as she wanted to teach these recruits about tactics and survival skills, she knew her real job was to show them how to find strength within themselves. That evening, during a break in training, one of the younger recruits approached her. He was quiet, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't sure he should be speaking to her at all. "Ma'am," he said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," she replied, gesturing for him to sit beside her on a wooden bench near the edge of the camp. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was peaceful, a rare moment of calm in the chaos of training. He hesitated for a second before blurting out, "What does it mean to be a black viper?" The question caught her off guard. For a moment, she just stared at him, memories flooding back. Colonel Harris's muttered comment. During her own training, the one that had lingered in her mind for years came rushing back. "That's a black viper mark," he'd said after she completed that grueling 20-mile march. At the time, she hadn't fully understood what it meant. But now, standing on the other side of the journey, she did. "It means you're unstoppable," she said finally, turning to look at the recruit. "It means no matter how hard things get, you keep going. You don't wait for permission to prove yourself, you do it because you know you can." The recruit nodded slowly, as if processing her words. Then, almost shyly, he asked, Do you think anyone here could become one?" She chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Trust me, you'll know it when you see it. Being a black viper isn't about titles or ranks. It's about heart. If you've got the heart of a warrior, if you refuse to give up, no matter what, you're already halfway there." As the days turned into weeks, she poured everything she had into teaching these recruits. She pushed them hard, sometimes harder than they thought they could handle. When they stumbled, she didn't coddle them. Instead, she reminded them why they were here, not to fit in, but to stand out. Not to survive, but to thrive. One day, during a particularly intense obstacle course exercise, she watched as a group of recruits struggled to complete a rope climb. One of them, a wiry young man who barely seemed strong enough to hold himself up, kept falling again and again. Each time he hit the ground, groans erupted from his teammates. Finally, exasperated, one of them shouted, "Just quit already. We don't have time for this." But instead of giving up, the recruit tightened his grip on the rope and tried again. His arms trembled, his face red with effort, but he refused to stop. After several agonizing minutes, he finally reached the top, collapsing onto the platform in exhaustion. Cheers erupted from his teammates, and even the instructor overseeing the exercise gave him a nod of approval. Later that evening, she pulled him aside. "I saw what you did today," she said. "Most people would have quit after the third fall. What made you keep going?" He shrugged, looking down at his boots. "I guess I didn't want to let everyone down. And I didn't want to let myself down either." She smiled, patting him on the shoulder. "That's the spirit of a black viper right there, never giving up, no matter how tough things get." By the end of the training cycle, her impact on fights the recruits was undeniable. They weren't just better soldiers, they were better versions of themselves. Some had started the program doubting their abilities, convinced they didn't belong. Now they walked with confidence, knowing they'd earned their place. Others had arrived cocky and overconfident, only to realize how much they still had to learn. Through it all, she guided them, challenging them to dig deeper than they ever thought possible. On graduation day, as the recruits stood in formation, ready to receive their badges, she couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. These men and women weren't just soldiers, they were leaders, dreamers, fighters. Each one carried a piece of her legacy, whether they realized it or not. And though she knew their journeys were just beginning, she also knew they'd carry the lessons she'd taught them wherever they went. As the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, she lingered behind, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The same thought kept circling in her mind: adversity reveals who you are. For her, it had revealed a fighter, a leader, and a mentor. For others, it might reveal something entirely different, but whatever it was, it would be theirs to claim. And that, she realized, was the true power of being a black viper. It wasn't about perfection or invincibility. It was about finding your strength, owning your story, and refusing to let anyone or anything diminish your light. Years rolled by, and a woman who once stood as an outsider in that military camp became a legend. Her story wasn't just whispered among recruits anymore, it was told with pride, passed down from one class to the next like a torch lighting the way for those who came after her. She had earned her place not only as an instructor, but also as a mentor, a role model, and a symbol of resilience. Yet, despite all the respect she commanded, she never lost sight of where she'd started or the struggles that shaped her. One crisp autumn morning, she stood at the edge of the training grounds, watching a new batch of recruits navigate an obstacle course. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth, familiar scents that took her back to her own early days in the program. Back then, every jump, climb, and sprint felt like a test of survival, not just physically, but emotionally. Now, seeing others face similar challenges filled her with a sense of purpose. She wasn't just teaching them how to be soldiers. She was showing them how to believe in themselves. As the recruits scrambled over walls and crawled under barbed wire, one young woman caught her attention. She was smaller than most of the others, her frame slight and wiry. Each time she fell or stumbled, she got back up without hesitation. There was something about her determination, a quiet fire, that reminded her of herself years ago. After the exercise ended, she approached the recruit, who was sitting on the ground catching her breath. "You're tough," she said, offering a hand to help her up. "I saw you out there." Most people would have quit after the fifth fall. What kept you going? The recruit looked up, surprised to be acknowledged. I don't know," she admitted. "I guess I didn't want to let myself down." She smiled, recognizing the answer immediately. It was the same response she'd given countless times when asked why she hadn't given up during her own training. "That's the heart of a fighter," she said. "Never letting yourself down is the first step to becoming unstoppable." Over the following weeks, she kept a close eye on the young woman, offering guidance whenever she needed it. During a tactical exercise, when the recruit froze under pressure, unsure of what to do next, she knelt beside her and said softly, "Breathe, you've got this. Trust yourself." Those simple words seemed to unlock something in the recruit, who quickly regained her composure and completed the mission successfully. Moments like these reminded her why she loved being an instructor. It wasn't just about drills and strategies. It was about helping people discover their potential. Every success, no matter how small, was a victory not just for the individual, but for everyone around them. And as the recruits grew stronger, so did the bonds between them. They learned to rely on each other, to lift each other up when things got tough. Watching them come together as a team filled her with pride. It was proof that leadership wasn't about standing above others, but standing beside them. By the end of the training cycle, the transformation in the recruits was undeniable. They weren't the same group of nervous, uncertain individuals who had arrived months earlier. They were confident, capable, and ready to take on whatever lay ahead. On graduation day, as they stood in formation, she couldn't help but feel a lump in her throat. These men and women weren't just soldiers, they were leaders, dreamers, fighters. Each one carried a piece of her legacy, whether they realized it or not. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse, one of the recruits approached her. It was the young woman she'd noticed on the obstacle course, the one who refused to give up no matter how many times she fell. She held out a folded piece of paper, her hands trembling slightly. "I wrote this for you," she said shyly. "Just thank you for everything." Curious, she unfolded the note and read it. The words were simple but heartfelt. Asterisk. "You taught me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about always getting back up. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Asterisk tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at the recruit. "Thank you," she replied, her voice thick with emotion, "for reminding me why I do what I do." Moments like these made every challenge worth it. Every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every battle fought against prejudice, it all led to this. To knowing that she had made a difference, however small, in someone else's life. As the years went by, her influence reached far beyond the confines of the training camp. Former recruits who had gone on to serve in various capacities often returned to visit, sharing stories of how her lessons had stayed with them. One veteran recounted how her advice about trusting his instincts saved his team during a dangerous mission overseas. Another spoke of how her emphasis on teamwork helped him build stronger relationships with his colleagues. Each story reinforced what she already knew. True leadership leaves a lasting impact. Eventually, retirement loomed on the horizon. The thought of leaving the camp behind filled her with mixed emotions. On one hand, she was ready for a quieter life, one where she could reflect on everything she'd accomplished. On the other hand, saying goodbye to the place that had shaped her and that she, in turn, had shaped felt bittersweet. On her final day, the entire camp gathered to honor her. Recruits, instructors, and even Colonel Harris were there, standing shoulder to shoulder. As she walked through the rows of faces, she felt overwhelmed by the love and respect surrounding her. When Colonel Harris stepped forward to speak, his voice carried the weight of years of shared experiences. "She changed this camp," he said simply, "not just by excelling herself, but by inspiring others to do the same. She proved that adversity doesn't define you, it reveals you. And she showed us all what it means to have the heart of a black viper." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the trees like a tribute to everything she'd achieved. As she stood there, soaking it all in, she realized that her journey wasn't really ending, it was evolving. Her legacy would live on in the recruits she'd trained, the lives she'd touched, and the stories they would tell long after she was gone. Later that evening, as she packed up her belongings, she paused to look out the window one last time. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the forest. In that moment, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had come a long way from the woman who once walked into this camp unsure of herself, unsure of whether she belonged. Now she knew exactly who she was, and she was proud of it. Adversity had revealed her strength. Doubt had fueled her determination, and laughter had only made her louder. She hadn't just survived, she had thrived. And though her chapter at the camp was closing, her story was far from over. Because being a black viper wasn't about titles or ranks, it was about heart, and hers was unbreakable.